Hi everybody, it's Josh with Talk About Trek, and I'm back again because I have finished reading yesterday Triangle, Imzadi II by Peter David. And as you all know, I just finished reading Imzadi before this, which was wonderful. A wonderful book. Peter David is an excellent writer, and Triangle, Imzadi II, is a good book, but it is not the sequel to Imzadi, which, of course, the publishers would love you to believe. But no, this is actually just a book called Triangle. And if you would go into it with that expectation, you would probably enjoy the book quite a bit more than, I guess I don't want to say I didn't enjoy it. I certainly did enjoy it, but I had maybe a different thought going into it, because I thought I was looking at the direct sequel to the wonderful book Imzadi. But that was not to be the case. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So before we do anything, let's start with the facts. I started this on December the 10th, finished it on the 19th. And this is a solid, I think, 375 pages. Set has a prologue set during Deep Space Nine, but basically the most of the novel is set during the aftermath of the crash of the Enterprise D, which I think is a really cool time frame to cover, and a very interesting time frame. So there were some cool things to look at there. Let's go ahead and just read the back cover here and see what they spoil for us. Imzadi. To the people of the planet Beta Z, including Counselor Deanna Troi of the Starship Enterprise, it means beloved and denotes a special closeness that can never be truly broken, or can it? Once William Riker was Deanna's Imzadi, but now the ship's counselor has embarked on an unlikely romance with Lieutenant Commander Worf. At first glance, they cannot be more different, but over time they have discovered hidden reserves of courage and compassion within each other. Yet does Worf's future truly lie with Deanna? And whom shall ultimately Deanna call Imzadi? Even in the 24th century, 3 is definitely a crowd. Well, that's actually a really good back cover synopsis, from my point of view, because it does not spoil any of the very fun plot points which are a part of this great book, Triangle. And I should really just start calling it Triangle and just get that into my head, because when you start looking at it that way and not the sequel, why did they do that? And then it is definitely a much better book. So, well, I guess you have a different take at it. So, I'm going to warn everyone. Look at these notes. Terrible. I got, to chapter 7, and even then the notes to chapter 7 really weren't very detailed. And after that, I just kind of fell off on the whole note scene, all the way to the end, where I've just barely made some notes, and then I'll kind of throw some final jots and tittles there in the end, and it'll just be a little one-pager here in the old journal. But that's fine. But let's get into the book, because it does actually have a lot of really fun things in it. A very interesting book is Triangle, not Imzadi II. Alright, so the book starts basically after Jadzia has died, and Worf is alone, and it kind of is him remembering this past time. So, an interesting prologue there. So, it takes it back, and the book starts kind of intertwining the A and the B story. So, the A story starts out on a Cardassian prison planet, where you have Riker, who is kind of being assaulted by this Cardassian guard, but gets a little bit of protection from this Romulan named Sakat, who he has befriended on this prison planet. And then there, around the end of chapter 1, because at first you don't know what Riker it is, but at the end of chapter 1 we do find out that this is the transporter duplicate Tom Riker, of course, not the actual Will Riker. So Tom, after leaving Starfleet, decided to join the Maquis, was caught by the Cardassians and strung up in prison here, and now he is made friends with this Romulan named Sakat, who has some measure of pull there at the facility. Riker digs a little bit deeper and finds out that is because Sakat is a spy. So he has valuable knowledge and can kind of drop bits and pieces to the Cardassians, and that's why he has some measure of control over the guards and some kind of autonomy there at the place. So this is setting up your A story here. Now your B story picks up right at the crash landing, where everybody is giving Counselor Troy a hard time. Well, not really, but everyone she talks to is, of course, saying, "Nice landing." And I don't know if it's an ongoing joke or whatever that people seem to give her a hard time. But, I mean, geez, she did the very best that she could. Could anyone else have really landed the saucer any better in that situation, honestly? I mean, they were under no power. She brought it down straight and level. I don't know what the problem is, but everyone wants to give her a hard time. But I think she did just fine. So, but you have the aftermath there, and you kind of see like a little bit of something going on between Worf and Troy. Alexander's there as well, and you can kind of it's more exploring him and Worf's relationship as well. So there's definitely some fun stuff there. And then they get to they're evacuated aboard the Farragut, and then aboard the Farragut, kind of like Geordi's talking with Riker, trying to he can see that something's wrong, and he's trying to get out what's going on, and eventually Riker kind of says, he's going to do something. He wants to pursue the relationship further, with Deanna that he's always put off. But right at that moment, Worf proposes to Deanna, and she accepts. So Riker is stunned, but he's stone-faced, kind of willing to turn it around, and but is pretty well heartbroken. So it's like right when he decided what to do, there was Worf stepping in, doing what he never could all that time. So now we're back to the Cardassian prison camp. So like I said, it kind of the first maybe 8 chapters just go 1, 2, 1, 2, switching between these two stories. The aftermath and the proposal, and then Tom Riker and his friend Sakat on this Cardassian prison planet. So they're there on this planet here, and all of a sudden there's like a rumbling from below, and his Romulan allies have done basically tunneled below the prison and have burst up through the tunnel, and that's like their escape plan for getting them out. So there's chaos everywhere, and Tom Riker managed to, in all the chaos, managed to save Sakat's life. And then, right, like, when they're escaping and everything, and he's got him, they get beamed up to the Romulan bird of prey. And, of course, who is in charge of this mission? Of none other than Sela. So, excellent. I'm glad that they he threw Sela into the mix here. Always fun to see a little bit of or just to get a little bit more story with her. I always thought she was a very cool villain, very fun, and her plans were always thwarted so well by the Enterprise crew. So, you can see that coming here as well. So, so Sela is basically Sakat is a mentor of Sela, and that's why she is there to rescue him. But he has sustained life-threatening injuries, and he is going to die. But before he dies, he basically tells Sela that, Tom saved his life, and he can help with whatever their great mission is that they're trying to do, which they don't reveal at this time. And then he passes away. Sela agrees to keep Tom Riker alive. Tom doesn't let on that he's Tom Riker, but instead that he is actually Will Riker, which makes him somewhat more valuable in his eyes to the Romulans. So that's what's going on with him. So now he is on board the Bird of Prey. Sela is actually not with the Romulan Star Empire at this time. After her many, many, many failures, she's like an outcast at this point. So this is a mission she's trying to do to try to get herself back into the good graces of the Empire. So we're going to switch back to... Man, when I lose my notes, I'm going to not remember anything that happened. We're just going to go off the wall. But anyway, they go back now to kind of meeting the parents mode, so they're back on Earth. And you get a nice little chapter with Worf and Troy and Alexander going to meet the Roshenkos and talking about the proposal. And they're happy for him at first, of course, but then later on in the day, uh, he speaks with his father, and as Worf is talking with his father about all this, like his father kind of expresses some like surprise, like she doesn't seem like she's the right person for you, but Worf says, she is. I've made my decision, and in the end, he gets his blessing, of course, and it was a nice little chapter, and I do like the just kind of getting more backstory on Worf and his childhood and how things went with him growing up. So I've always been interested in that, a Klingon growing up on Earth. I always thought it'd be very cool. So back with Riker and Sela. Now you've got Sela trying to seduce Riker a little bit, which is able to work because she's got this kind of Romulan, not telepath, but kind of like almost telepath, who can kind of push feelings onto people, and has a cool trick where he can kind of push his presence out of people's minds so that he can basically disappear. So she's got this guy working for him, and he kind of pushes some feelings into Tom, and the two of them actually do end up getting together there. But Tom, all the while, who's still telling her he's Will, is working a plan to, of course, stop whatever nefarious thing she is doing. Or is he? He thinks to himself. Now the story really starts getting crazy. And then this is where I lose my notes. So we're going to go ahead and just go off the cuff here. So basically what happens from this point on in the story, they go to Beta Z. And when they go to Beta Z, things are going to get crazy. Peter David writes Oksana Troi so well. And again, the chapters that she's in here are just very well done. And of course, she's opposed to it. She thinks that Troi is coming there to talk about a proposal from Riker, because they are Imzadi, of course. So she's opposed at first, and then after some convincing and some talking and an awkward dinner party and some other things, they actually end up having, basically Worf agrees to training. So she's going to train him in the Betazoid ways. And the first thing that they do is that she wants to try to spar with him. So, and this was a very, very well done chapter. I like the way this was done, and hopefully I can explain it in a way that makes sense. But basically, she was sparring with Worf, who easily outmatched her in every way. And the sparring was just supposed to be basically a test, where she was giving Worf many different ways to get out of the situation without humiliating her, but he could not do it for his own sake, for his own honor's sake. So he had chances to back away, to say, I concede, or something like that. Didn't do it, and eventually she ends up getting knocked out and hurt pretty bad. But I think Worf kind of learns the lessons that she's teaching there. But now the plan is going to start to go into effect. So back on Earth, Picard and Riker have been going through the kind of inquest that happens after you lose a starship. They have to question everybody, make sure all proper procedure was followed, all that good stuff. Captain Jellicoe or Admiral Jellicoe is there, of course. But after the inquest, they find that no harm was done by any of the officers. So they're ready to move on. And they have been told that they are going to be getting a new Enterprise, the Enterprise E, but will not be ready for about a year. So the crew of the Enterprise has got about a year to cool their heels. You got Worf and Troi off there meeting the parents. And this is when Riker decides he's going to make his move. So he decides that he is definitely going to at least tell Troi what he feels. He's done holding off, so he decides to go to Beta Z to do that. Unfortunately, Jellicoe says, no, I'm not going to let you just run off to Beta Z for a girl. You got an assignment here, and you're going to do it. So he kind of sneaks off under the radar, with the help of a very fun side character from the last book, Sergeant Tang, who kind of gets him on a under the radar flight so that he can get away, and he's able to get himself to Beta Z. So here's where we're going to kind of get a little bit fuzzy. But in the broad strokes of the final half of the book, here's what happens. Sela's plan is to kidnap Deanna and Alexander and use them as leverage to make Riker commit an assassination attempt against Gowron. And then this would, cause massive trouble between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, which is what the Romulan Star Empire would want. So that is the plan. So they crash Beta Z, and then they you get an interesting few chapters here because they give you, and I like it when writers do this, and I think this is something that Peter David does especially well, is when you get basically kind of like a little jump forward. So the chapter where it kind of you find out what happens is Worf. He's upset. He had asked to kind of go off into the woods and stuff, so he comes back. And he comes back to this terrible scene of blood on the floor and like all this, and he starts fighting all these Romulans, and is basically just, he's like in a Klingon blood rage pretty much, and is really taking them out. He's about to be killed when he is shoved off of the hill by Tom Riker, still masquerading as Will Riker. Will Riker is still on his way to Beta Z. Man, this book does get terribly intricate there in the meanwhile, and in this little middle portion here with duplicate Rikers and just people sneaking around not knowing what's going on, but basically Sela's plan is a success. She is able to capture Deanna and Alexander. She injures Mr. Holm, and Mr. Holm puts up some serious action against the Romulans, kind of tossing them around like rag dolls. Even Mrs. Troy is able to do some damage with some mental powers that she flings out at them. But in the end, the Romulans are able to overcome them. And then when Worf comes in and he kind of sees the aftermath of what happens, that's when he goes crazy. He gets pushed out of the way of this final blast of phaser fire from the Romulans by Tom Riker, falls into this water, and that's where you kind of lose track of him for a little bit. Oh, excuse me. I've been sick for a little bit too, so. But, so, Sela has Troy and Alexander, and Sela has Tom Riker. Okay, so, now this is when Will Riker shows up to Beta Z, kind of finds out everything that's been happening, and then, but when he shows up, he gets mistaken for Tom, who is a prison escapee. And at that time, the prison guard who was so mean to Tom Riker in Chapter 1 shows up on Beta Z to collect the prisoner Tom Riker. Now, Will Riker, in his stunning plan to get away from Jellicoe in secret, has left basically a kind of a Ferris Bueller message of himself, so that when the Federation tries to confirm that Will Riker is indeed on Earth and not on Beta Z, they call Will Riker, and they reach a hologram of Will Riker, and are convinced that Will Riker is on Earth, and they must have Tom Riker there on Beta Z. So Will Riker gets arrested on Beta Z and is carted back to, I think it's called Liaison 4 or something, the Cardassian prison planet. So Worf, who last we saw was pushed into the river by Tom Riker, was actually saved, luckily, by the Klingons. Gowron had sent a ship. Gowron's been kind of feeling out and knowing things have been going on, and sent a ship knowing there might be some trouble there on Beta Z, and was able to actually beam up Worf kind of just in the nick of the time, and save him. So Worf, saved by Gowron, given a little scout ship, and is able to pursue Sela to find out where they might have gone. And his only clue at this point is Tom Riker. And now he knows that Tom Riker has been picked back up by the Cardassians. So he makes a trip over to Liaison and gets himself set up with a questioning with Tom Riker. with Tom Riker, who's actually Will Riker. Will Riker, who is only surviving this harsh imprisonment by basically like going inside of his own head and kind of like shutting everything else out, which is what he's doing, meets with Worf and kind of sees it his one chance to get away. And he's able to convince Worf, I forget how exactly, that he is the real Will Riker. So, Worf is convinced. Worf tries to get him out the right way, say, this is not your prisoner, please have him released. The guy says no. Worf says, well, okay, well, we'll be back. This was one of the funniest parts of the book. I was reading this in the shower, and I laughed out loud. It was so funny. But, here they are, they're kind of like in the little cell, and they hear like a rumbling, and what happens? Worf actually just basically comes in with his scout ship and crashes directly into the cell, pretty much opens up the door, says, alright, come on, get in. He gets in, and they leave. So, that was a very well-designed prison escape by Worf. I thought it was very well done, so that was fun. So they get away, and they argue. They have some pretty deep arguments there on the way. Riker is still not kind of fessing up, that he was coming to say that he wanted Troy. He wanted to profess his love for her, and Worf is pissed. He is so mad. He has just had enough. And eventually they get into they don't get into the fight yet. What happens now is basically, before Will Riker left Beta Z, he went and saw Mrs. Troy, who kind of gave him a little bit of advanced power to find Deanna. So with this kind of souped up psychic ability, he's able to close his eyes and feel out where she is, gives the coordinates to Worf. They make their way to Liaison 4, where they are promptly captured by the Romulans, accomplishing nothing. So, that was pretty bad. So now Sela has both Rikers, Worf, and Deanna, and Alexander. So this is where she puts her grand plan into motion. And I'm sure I'm missing some things here and there, but that's fine. Her grand plan is she was going to send Will Riker to the Klingon homeworld with a bottle of poisoned wine to attempt to assassinate Gowron, as we discussed before. How she's going to convince them to do that is by killing Troy and Alexander. So she wheels them in, gives them both a poison, and they both start dying. Like screaming, dying. They're like in terrible pain. And they're all just kind of like standing there. And like Worf is like, no, do my duty. Alexander knows it. Troy knows it. And like, he's not going to do anything. He's going to stand there and watch them die. And Riker at first is like, I'm a Starfleet officer. I'm not going to be coerced by you. And he's not going to do it. But in the end, he can't take it any longer. His Imzadi is dying, screaming out. So he says, I'll do it, I'll do it. And this is when him and Worf really get into it. He agrees to do it. They end up getting put back in their cells or whatever. But they really get into it then. So they have a little bit of a fist fight. And Riker ends up on the wrong end of that after he tries to headbutt Worf, which is not a good idea. But kind of everything kind of comes out then, and they're able to kind of at least get it out there. But Worf is pretty disgusted. But, I mean, what was Riker? What would you do? What was Riker going to do? So, I mean, duty and honor, but your love, So, before Riker is sent off on his final mission, Tom comes and has a little bit of a talk with him before. And it's kind of silly that Sela didn't... I think Sela had too much trust in Tom at the end of this book, really. But anyway, Sela comes and talks to Riker and knocks him out with a hypo spray or something and does the old switcheroo. So now Tom Riker is Will Riker is Tom. So Sela sends Will Riker, who is actually Tom, to the council, basically the council chambers. Picard is there as well, who's kind of negotiating something with the Klingons there. there's some neat dipsy doodles here that happen here. I forgot about I didn't forget about, but I'm not going to be able to tell properly, of course. But basically, what happens is, so you have Tom Riker masquerading as Will Riker, going to the Klingon homeworld, planning a meeting with Gowron. When he gets to the planet, learns Picard is there, and of course the Klingons think he's there to see Picard, so they send him to see Picard. He meets with Picard. Picard acts like nothing's up. He's just talking to his old buddy Will Riker. So he proceeds with the plan as expected. So he goes to the Klingon council chambers, speaks with Gowron, and offers him the bottle. Now, in the meantime, they've had a chapter back with Sela on the Bird of Prey, all about basically what the real plan was. And it wasn't just an assassination attempt. The bottle actually contained a deadly pathogen that, once opened, would wipe out the entire planet. Oh my god. Sela, what are you doing, you monster? But anyway, that was the actual plan. However, thwarted. Tom Riker doesn't know this, of course, because he would never do that. He thinks he's going to attempt to poison Gowron. And he actually offers to drink it first as a show of good faith. So he's sitting there trying to open the bottle, and he can't get the top off. He's wondering what's happening. All of a sudden, the bottle starts wiggling and changing. The bottle is Odo. The bottle is Odo, right? So there's Odo as the bottle, and it is revealed in the end that during the time when Troy, Waxana Troy, and Worf were training, she mentioned how Odo was such a very reliable security person. So Worf reached out to Odo, and with the help of Picard. Now, Picard, of course, as soon as Tom Riker walked into the room, he knew that was not Will Riker. He knew. But he was playing right along with the whole thing. They also knew Sela's location and have sent a ship there. As soon as they sense the Federation coming, Sela's like, run! So all the Romulans start to run. They're going to try to take the prisoners with them, but in their haste to leave, they kind of aren't watching very closely on the prisoners, and the Federation prisoners are able to pull some hijinks and escape. And Peter David, for whatever reason, felt the need to write a scene where a squad of Romulans is coming up behind them. Counselor Troy, who's just kind of been covering the rear at this point, mows them all down with her disruptor, and then blows it off. I don't know. That just stuck out to me as very silly. It was very strange. But anyway, she does that. They escape. They're actually rescued by the Excalibur and Commander Shelby of the Excalibur. And they escape, and they're able to get away. The end of the book. Worf basically breaks it off with Troy and says, I'm not ready to do this yet. And that was one of my favorite parts of the book, was just his maybe couple of paragraph speech to Troy there in the end, and then like the bit of emotion that he's showing right before he leaves. And then there's the end. And when I was reading the end, I was kind of like, what? So the end is basically after all of this, and the whole thing with Riker he's gonna do it. He's gonna tell her that he loves her, that he wants to be with her. Maybe he's gonna propose to her. Maybe this is when it's gonna happen. But no, in the end, it almost reminds me of like some kind of sitcom or something. You know, Riker's like, oh well, maybe we'll just give it some time, and we'll see what happens. You know, I'll see you aboard the Enterprise E. You know, kind of like sidesteps out the door and like runs away, and you can just like Troy's like, Will Riker, and I'm like, what is this ending? This does not seem like the way that this book was supposed to be ending. And you know what? That was not the way the book was supposed to be ending. Not at all. So anyway, what I have here is Voyages of the Imagination by Jeff Ayres, which is a companion to all the Star Trek books, where basically they have interviewed, for a lot of these books, they've interviewed the authors and kind of got their thoughts and some ideas about the book. And I loved what I was able to read in here. So first off, what I really liked was that Peter David, basically, they wanted Peter David to write a sequel to Imzadi. Peter David didn't want to do that. He did have an idea for a story about this story, basically, but he didn't want it to be seen as a sequel to Imzadi. So after kind of a bit of negotiation back and forth between him and the publisher, they decided, the compromise we came up with was that the title was going to be Triangle, and in very small print it would say Imzadi II. That is what I was promised, and they swore they would do. So what happens is the cover shows off Imzadi II in gargantuan print, and Triangle really, really small, which totally pissed me off. And I can see why. I mean, come on, look at that. And it gives people the wrong impression here. And the other thing is that he wanted to do something major with the end, and he wanted to have Riker propose to Troy, but they wouldn't let him do it. So he had this whole chapter written out, and he had to scrap it and write the ridiculous sitcom last chapter, which really was kind of silly. But actually, it does have an epilogue where it returns to Worf on Deep Space Nine, coming to terms with Jadzia's death and everything after, I guess, going through all that in his mind. So, but yeah, just imagine if they'd actually, what this book would have been if instead of Big Imzadi II, this was just Triangle, and it was the story of how Riker finally got over himself, and was able to come and propose to Troy. I think that would have been a lot better. I mean, maybe the book sold better with the Big Imzadi II, but I think that it might have left more readers, not as happy, I guess, if they were looking for something else. As for me, I enjoyed it. It was a fun book. It was not the sequel to Imzadi, but it was fun anyway. And I'm always happy to get more backstory on Riker, Troy, Worf, all that. So good. And Peter David, of course, knows these characters and writes these characters so very well. So, wow, that rant went long. But it was a good book. It was fun. And definitely give it a shot if you're a fan of any of these characters or if you're a fan of Peter David's work. So, we're going to end that one here. I really have no idea what I'm going to be doing next. I definitely would like to do a kind of a year-in review here before the end of the year. And looks like we'll have time to get that done for sure. But as far as what I'm reading, who knows? So if you have any suggestions, let me know. As always, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Live long and prosper. And we'll see you next time. Bye.